Oh, we're interested in what it actually costs to start a political party, especially with Patricia de Lille going into it, to actually register a party with the IEC and then to register for elections. Take us through the costs involved there.
Okay, from an election management body, there are no prohibitive costs of starting a party. If a person wants to register a political party, all that we ask for is that they submit a deed of foundation of the party, the constitution of the party, a demonstration of support by about 500 members if you want to register a party nationally, and you advertise that in the government gazette. If your logo is acceptable to us, if your name is acceptable, the party is registered. The only fees that are levied are for participating in an election. The Commission will imminently disclose the fees that it intends to levy for participation in next year's election. You'll recall that in 2014, the fees were 200,000 for participating in the national elections and 45,000 for each of the legislatures. Those are deposits that are refunded to a political party that obtains a seat. Interestingly, as an electoral commission, we do not keep the money if you do not get a seat. The money is forfeited to the National Treasury and not to us. So it's not a money-making scheme on our part.
So 200,000 for registering for national in the previous election.
Yes.
What happens when a party says we want to be on the ballot, but they can't come up with that money? Have you had cases like that?
We've had cases where parties had submitted names of candidates but were unable to raise the requisite amounts of money. If you consider that there are over 500,000 parties registered, 271 of those registered to contest elections nationally. Over 500 parties.
500?
In the Republic, yes. So if there is no mechanism to test seriousness to contest, you may end up with a ballot that is unmanageable, and that would also create problems for the voters in making an informed choice, because it's easier to vote on an A4 page than to vote in a booklet.
Of course, there's been concern about party political funding. There's calls for transparency when it comes to that. People want to know how their parties are funded, especially when it comes to funding from big corporates. What's the IEC's feeling on that?
Hitherto, we've had a regime for party funding. There's an Act of Parliament that is administered by the Electoral Commission. It is called the Public Funding of Represented Political Parties. As the name suggests, parties only received funds from the fiscus that they had to disclose and account for. They could receive private funding, and that area was unregulated. Last year, Parliament set up an ad hoc committee to look into the private funding of political parties. Earlier this year, that committee sponsored legislation through the two houses of Parliament, and that legislation was passed by the National Assembly and the NCOP. As we speak, it is with the President for assent. That law tries to do a number of things. One, it tries to regulate the private funding of political parties, to make it mandatory for political parties to disclose the donations, but more importantly, to disclose the donors. It also prohibits certain sources of donation. For an example, a political party cannot receive donations from a foreign government or a foreign agency. Similarly, the party cannot receive money from state institutions like state entities. It also places an obligation on the person making the donation to disclose that donation, and also places a threshold on the money that a donor can donate to a party in a single year. More importantly, I think, for political parties is that it changes the disbursement formula. Previously, there was a formula that allocated 90% of the fund proportionally. And the criticism was that it favors big or incumbent political parties. Just to illustrate the point, in the last financial year, the money that was disbursed to political parties was 140 million. Over 120 million of that went to three parties, the ANC, the EFF, and the Democratic Alliance, because they enjoy the majority of the seats in the National Assembly and in legislatures. If the bill is assented to, what it does, it changes the formula for allocation, meaning the proportional component will now be 2/3, and the equitable proportion will be about 33%. So that increases the chances of even parties with fewer seats getting meaningful sums from the fund.
As the oversight body, and you probably say that you can't really pick a side on this, but how do you feel? Do you think there needs to be more transparency when it comes to political party funding?
Research and literature in this area indicates that democracy is enhanced by openness. Because the more open with your funds, the more open with your funders, voters can make an informed choice to say, do you want to support this political party? Does it represent our interest, or it represents interest of people for whom maybe there may not be confluence with what you want to support?
And then lastly, you were concerned about hacking going into the next year's elections. Have you resolved those concerns? Have you put better systems in place to deal with it?
I think in the era of technology, it will be foolhardy for any election management body to go into an election in a blasé fashion. We're working increasingly hard to strengthen that area of our operation to make sure that we could withstand any hits, but more importantly, in an unfortunate event that we do suffer a hit, that we can recover and still declare the results within as short a period of time as is possible.
What's prompting those concerns? Is there a specific target or a hit that you think is going to happen?
If you consider the hacks that have happened to big conglomerates, people who have more budget than we could ever dream of, so it makes it conceivable that it is possible that we could be. An election is a big thing. So to think that there are no people who do not have an interest in the outcome, I think would be foolhardy, and to not be prepared would be a disservice to the Republic.
So there's no specific threat that you know that your intelligence services know of, which is why you're raising concerns about it in general?
There is no specific threat as we speak, but we want to stand ready so that we can withstand any attempts should there be any.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, sir. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean.
That was Masego Shiburi, Deputy Chief Electoral Officer at the IEC.